There's forces that are working against you. It is just, we need you to be hollowed out. We need less of you around. And those that we allow to live will be essentially UBI serfs in a surveillance finance Bolshevik state. That is the tokenization game and the system.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with our esteemed guest, Francis Hunt. Francis is a renowned trader, technical analyst, and macroeconomics trends forecaster. He is also the originator of the Hunt volatility funnel trading method. Francis, it's always a delight to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us today.
I just love being in the company of the smartest yet still youthful young minds out there. So thanks for having me back on, guys.
Always a pleasure. Okay, so there is so much happening in the economy and in the geopolitical landscape that is, it's challenging to know even where to start these conversations. We can begin from any number of angles, given the multitude of perspectives we could adopt. Let's begin with your thoughts on the recent assassination attempt on Trump and what this actually signifies for the broader narrative of the political system. And this will naturally lead us into the discussion of the economy and the economic conditions that are being shaped for the population moving forward. Afterwards, we can shift our focus onto markets and the current state. So please just tell us what your thoughts are on the Trump assassination attempt.
Okay, that's an interesting kickoff point and a starting point that's likely to cause some division and maybe some resentment by many. It's an opinion. It's my take. I could be right, I could be wrong. We're talking from afar with what we see. All I use to understand a series of events is the template and MO, modus operandi, of known forces that do various activities. And overall, to me, it's quite clear that this was a controlled operation in totality in terms of what happened. The concern for those that take things literally should be, you have a lone gunman assassin as original official first narrative who is patsied and terminated. This is very much in the vein of countless shooter events and of course RFK, JFK and countless other. And the value of that is the person who played, who is usually young, naive, that's been put into a role without even necessarily knowing they might have been put in a role. That doesn't mean they didn't know. It doesn't mean they would absolutely were innocent in it. Is killed and doesn't get to say anything. And it's kind of that open and shut case. So straight away, that should cause concern for you in terms of your understanding of that. Also, when you look at the Clinton death list, actually, if the dark state wants you dead, they usually get you dead. And it isn't always shootings. In fact, shootings in high visibility, high public volume of people is actually quite a common low-end way of getting rid of enemies. We've all seen a global event which has involved medical interventions. There's many ways you get rid of somebody. Even planes falling out the sky with Latin American leaders is more subtle because there's still the possibility there was a mechanical event with the plane that leads to no perp. The minute you have a shooter, you have someone who is holding a gun. But that's why that person there's always a patsy and that person is killed and then it's open and shut case. So the whole aspect of that is don't dig any further, it's all done. What we've actually understood is that there's quite clearly other people that were involved already in shooting. And overall, the outcome you get is usually the outcome they, and we can go into who they actually wanted. In other words, they're pretty good at stage managing and getting the outcome. And if you look at, well, what's the outcome and who gains, you would hardly say this was damaging for Trump. This is probably the story of Republican landslide and the fist-waving theatrics at the end, which I would argue your ear would be absolutely whistling, your drums would be, God knows, after a high projectile. This is hero making. This is stage. This points to Hollywood and stage management for me. This will upset a lot of people, me saying that statement, and a lot of people might even be switching off now and going away. I'm sorry, but on balance of probabilities, and everything I do in trading and markets is what's on balance of probabilities, who gains. These are the quality of your understanding is always going to be determined by the quality of the questions you ask. How can I be better when things don't go your way? And even when they do, who gains from all of this, etc., etc. If you're asking me, how do you get a global ID system into America? You don't do it on a leftist government. If you're asking me, how do you get some gun controls through, potentially, you don't do it on a leftist government. The right is fully on its guard for all those things in the environment of a leftist government. However, if you want to get it through and you say, listen, guys, we really got to do this, those immigrants are just storming across the border. Without this, we can't stop them. We need the biometrics. We need to know you all got to have an ID, then we're going to stop those damn immigrants. If you have a rightist hero who gives you a rightist reason in post an election that he's landslide won and has control over the Senate, you'll say, hard as it is, we need to do this. It's the lesser evil, You can see the speech, and you can actually see global ID systems getting in on a right government, potential gun controls, various things being advanced potentially on a right government. That could never happen on a left government because you would have civil unrest. These aren't their guys. So people are braced for that attack in a leftist government, the right wing. They're not. They're sleeping on the job when they think their guy is in. And that's one take that I would have. And I would certainly say it's time for the global ID. We can see Finkelstein, I call him, but he's Larry Fink, is out there with his tokenization, his love for tokenization, which is a derivative proxy that gets inserted between the assets you own. And that for that to work, you need the ID that gets associated to all the assets that you own. So it's, okay, it's Francis, he owns that car and that property. And then later, as I say, I understate its value according to the law on the property, and they have the right to do an immediate purchase with their tokens. And I now, and immediately a rental agreement comes into play, and I'm now a tenant in my own house. So they are really hungry, and this is BlackRock's game. They are really, really hungry. And Larry Fink is, while you'll say, I'm pro Bitcoin, what he's actually pro is the blockchain and tokenization so that you can transcend national boundaries. And everyone goes, that's good. I don't like national government. No, you're going up to a worldwide system, which actually is a worldwide government where anywhere in the world, BlackRock can see who owns that house. And it has, as I say, a letting agreement preloaded, a bundle of documents, an automatic conveyancing system preloaded, and they get to proliferate the tokens so that they can buy everything out and turn everyone into a rentier society. This is extremely very much how they're going, and that ties into the you will own nothing and be happy. Hey, it's not on you. We'll do the garden. We'll look after all these services. You just rent. Nice, simple life. The laziness in people is encouraged. The fact that you can just sit back, don't worry, you don't need to own is cumbersome. You hear the narrative on Airbnbs, has no homes, but is a business. Uber has no cars, but is a taxi company. All of these elements, they're selling this idea, you don't need to own things. You don't need to own things. What they're actually saying is, we want your stuff. We want your stuff, and we'll be the owner, and you can be lazy slave boy who pays rent. That's where, so I've taken you from Trump, and I'm saying what agendas could be advanced by a landslide Republican win. They've made a hero out of him. What have they successfully done? They've engaged the right immensely. The participation will be huge. Everyone will be saying, I've done my patriotic duty by going and putting an X for him. Absolute stage mount, Hollywood 101, winning out. They put you've got an unpopular vice president who's succeeded a very dubious Biden being shuffled off, that whole badly managed Democratic thing. It's perfect for them to fall. And can I also point out from one of our recent interviews that we conducted that it isn't the same situation that when he came in 2016. Obama had actually had an austere final 4 years. and had run things down. It wasn't doing too much expenditure. Trump came in on 3.2% debt to GDP. He's now coming in on 6.7% debt to GDP on their numbers, which I will tell you are bent and broken as far as anything you can believe in government statistics. Plus, you've got a treasury that's spending $1 trillion every 100 days extra over and above. And he's already promised to extend the taxes that the 2025 ending for the taxes of his scheme that he introduced in 2016, which will cost $4 trillion over a 10-year cycle. So he has to find that money, and his method that he's talking about of how he'll find it is he's going to tax China 60% on imported goods, which is now down to 13%, and the rest of the world 10%. So a trade war, which is highly disinflationary because everyone else responds in kind. Prices go up, people spend less, and you have an economic contraction. So he doesn't have mechanism to easily maintain what he's already promised. So basically, he gave you a Christmas gift in 2016 that he's not done paying for, and he says, don't worry, I'll let you keep the gift. I won't ask you for it back because I can't make the payment. However, I'm going to need to charge you on other things that you've assumed for free. As my son, you're going to have to pay more rent, etc., in other places for me just to allow you to keep the gift I've already gave you. So it's nothing new in terms of stimulating the economy. It's just maintaining what already is and finding the space on the budget. So the starting point where someone comes in is awful. It is absolutely fiscally awful. To add a little bit further color to that, 75% of that new debt that has been added by the Treasury Spending, which is Jenny Yehudi Yellen, I call her Granny Yoda, is that particular. She's been putting 75% of that, put it on my credit card, on short-term bills. Why? Because they don't want to put too much pressure on the long-term interest rates. So when I talk about debt, we lose a lot of people. Basically, they issue debt. In other words, we're spending too much money. You have to create an asset for someone to buy so that you get that money. That is debt. The long-term interest rates, so 20, 30 years debt, where you only pay the people back in 20 or 30 years' time, you don't want that interest rate to go too far up. That affects housing. You know, people who are borrowing on houses, 30-year mortgages, 25-year mortgages, etc., that pushes the rates up. If you start offering a glut of the stuff, people demand a higher yield. So that forces rates up. So what has she been doing? It's kind of like you're a household. Let me bring it to people so you can understand. Instead of putting your house and your car on long-term debt, you're now putting it on a credit card. And you're rotating it, and you have to settle it every 3 months and every 6 months instead of every 25 years, or on your car every 5 years, where people have payments. So just imagine the nature of those finances that you get. Not only are you already getting a machine that's consuming well more than the income it's getting. So here's another quick flash of a stat that I just say people aren't getting their head around. Of all the tax you pay in the United States, and that's all the tax revenues. Don't forget, every time you buy something, you're probably paying a sales tax. You're paying everything, not just your income and your corporate tax, if you're lucky enough to run your own business, and then pay personal tax. All tax, 76% of it is now going to a banking cartel to pay interest. So let's be clear, the exorbitant privilege where you could have, as a government, issued your own money, the fact that you had this cartel that killed 3 presidents to ensure a central bank was installed, that exorbitant privilege, so don't talk to me about white privilege, that unbelievable exorbitant privilege is seeing a group of people receive 76% of your tax payments. A banking cartel, on the basis that they lent the money to your government by allowing a borrowing system to borrow money into existence. And Granny Yellen Yoda is ensuring and helping that you continue to overspend, so that you continue to get in a debt trap, so that more of your tax is just being directed to her friends and cartel members this massive interest rate. And everything else they are doing, they are borrowing that creates further interest. So the expenditure in the military industrial complex, all the other things, is creating a bigger credit card bill for bigger future interest payments also owing. And when this all defaults, you are the collateral to the banking cartel, and they always get made whole. So that's why you are getting the services. I love the US, love the American people. I'm in the US now, but I look at the highways, it's concrete, they're uneven, they haven't been resurfaced in a while down here in Florida. There's tire carcasses, bits of cars that haven't been swept and cleaned in the fast lane, the express lane. You're not getting the infrastructure, you're not getting the services you're going to pay for, and that's going to get more. Your rubbish and garbage collection, as they say, is going to go down, the frequency will go down, the quality of the service will go down, and you will pay a whole bunch more. So taxation is going to have to go up. When these guys panic and they can no longer balance the books, what are they going to do? They're going to screw their tax base harder. That's how it works. And they do it in two ways. Give you less for your money in terms of what you're paying on your municipality, your rates and taxes, your local taxes. Remember, the government often bails out local municipal areas. They're going to stop doing that. So, your lawns won't get mowed, various other things. So you're going to see obvious signs of degeneracy on ever higher bills in an environment where you're already from the bottom up getting taxed on the inflation. So you're top down taxed is going to get higher and higher. Your inflation is dragging you into higher marginal taxes. And this is the great squeeze. And this is how they level the relatively rich Western nations' living standards to that of the rest of the world. And that is what a global surveillance finance communism is all about. And that's the process we're sitting in right now. So I've taken you from Trump right the way through to the macroeconomics, but I've got some awesome charts to share with you to show you where we are in that economic collapse. But I just want to allow you a bit of opportunity to unpack some of what I've just said.
Sure. I would love my brother to put his take on this. But first of all, you summarized everything in a chronological order, and I really appreciate that. To summarize a little bit about what you said, is that today we're, I think, witnessing two major shows. And I say shows because that's really what they are. You have one on the surface, and that's the political drama that seems to captivate the public attention by design. But underneath all of it, there seems to be a far more sinister agenda at play. And the ultimate goal is not the preservation of democracy or the protection of human rights, but more of the concentration of wealth and power into the hands of a select few. Sorry, guys. And as far as the
ownership of
blockchain,
the assets thereof, that will then be income streams for which you are the payee.
right. And as far as the blockchain, though, it seems that this has been co-opted by the major financial institutions in order to solidify their control.
Yes.
Basically. Okay.
Vendel, and it also allows for the transnationalization of corporate fascism globally, worldwide. So I refer to BlackRock as the Black Cube Zeppelin that currently is anchored largely over America, but is hoovering up American assets.
Right. Even at the UN, they have the Black Cube in the prayer room upstairs. It's just very symbolic. But please, Vendel, I'd like to get your take on this as well.
Yeah. So first thing I wanted to mention is the first thing Francis Hunt responded to was, I agree with you 100%, Francis. What I want to say is the deep state, the cabal, the shadow figures, whatever you want to call it, the big families, they are strategical masters at covert operations. And throughout history, we have seen that when they want somebody eliminated that poses a threat to their system, you will be gone. They'll take you out somehow, some way. And mostly the way tradecraft works on an intelligence level is they make it look like an accident. So I completely agree with you. And the truth is, that's all I wanted to say. If they wanted Trump gone, he'd be gone. Okay.
Yeah. In an accident. As you say, there's no crime in an accident.
There's nothing to investigate. There's no crime. They shut the books, case closed, done. Move on to the next scenario. And the thing is, that's how they operate. And that's not my opinion. That's a fact. Anybody who understands how covert operations take place, how intelligence agencies operate on a global international level, especially when there's a direct threat to their party or their system, their policies, They take you out and they make it look like an accident, and there's no way getting around that. If they want you gone, you're gone. Period. Full stop. And the second thing I wanted to say is that, first of all, income tax, tax we didn't have until 1913. What's interesting about that is in 1913, that's when the Federal Reserve was created as well. And what's crazy is before 1913, we had police departments, schools, economy was booming. We had roads, freeways. People kept everything they earned, and we were doing fine. And then 1913, Federal Reserve comes in, money laundering happens, financing the World War. And you can see where this is going, that taxes are 100% a scam and for other purposes, but they lie to your face and convince you and tell the people that it's mandatory. And this is to finance the infrastructure, the government facilities, government employees. But that's not true, because if that really was, this country, the United States, would look like a Dubai times 10.
Yeah.
In regards to tokenization, this is the ultimate goal, and this will be tied in directly to digital IDs, selling you're going to have to trade your liberty for convenience, and they will sell you on it by saying this is for your security. And how do they do that? By creating a man-made orchestrated crisis.
Event.
And yes, but carry on, you guys. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, a lot to unpack in what you said too, Vendel. Very good, thorough explanation on that, and Francis, you as well. Now, as far as digital assets are concerned, let's like shift the conversation a little bit. A lot of people are here to make money as well. I know we are in the early stages of a bull run, and the accumulation phase, I believe, is coming to an end. However, with the war and the geopolitical tensions on the rise, do you think, Francis, that this could impact these markets and possibly even slow down the momentum? And I'm asking this because, as Gerald Celente says, and I watched your interview with Gerald Celente, phenomenal, very good, informative, great guy to speak to. But he taught us that when all else fails, they take you to war. And if we do look at history, this pattern does hold true. Every time the economy is struggling, the neocons want to take us, lead the country into some sort of conflict. And at this moment, they're seeking any excuse to go to war. And we understand that war is often used as a means to possibly accelerate the transition into the new system. But the current situation just feels exceptionally fragile and uncertain. So I'm not one to buy into the fear-mongering and whatnot, but the reality is that I think people are becoming poor while the rich continue to amass wealth. So what's the end game here, and where does the situation lead us?
The sad point about collapse of empire and war, as you mentioned, is that once you start getting into the capitulation phase, it is literally like we're all sitting in the golden cathedral, Notre Dame, whatever the case may go, and the golden horde are coming, swinging their axes, and the insiders and politicians start stripping the gold off the walls, inside the cathedral, if you will, and everyone else is sitting around in the pews in the church wondering what's going on, and quietly people are walking around and nicking a candle, a silver-plated candle holder and various other things. So it actually accelerates until eventually, when the horde is not far away and everyone's got to run, they're grabbing everything without even acting like they're pretending that they're stealing anymore. It's just a ransack. And unfortunately, that's how things go. And once the high on the hog, upper echelons of the crime syndicate have all positioned well, you start to get the lower echelons that know what's going on and picking up, starting to break, on the basis that these crimes will never get prosecuted because it's not even going to be under their jurisdiction anymore. It's going to be a ransack. It's going to belong, whatever they leave is going to be stolen by the new system, which in my case is a surveillance finance Bolshevik system that is going to be forced on us through the blockchain, through tokenization, and everything we've already mentioned. So rather than getting better, it gets worse. And the military-industrial complex since millennia has been the primary corruption vehicle for wealth transfer. It is the most efficient. They are the shareholders of all the biggest and largest holders of all the biggest military industrial complex companies. Ammunition does actually have a sell-by date. It's use it or lose it. So they ensure that they use it rather than have too much written off. It's great at expenditures. The brokers and intermediaries are all hoodlums, crooks, and bung takers, and they are put there by control. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Thatcher's son was involved in coups in Africa and all of this. So the whole political, Stratfor, all these companies that are advantaged, they're all war hawks, the likes of Tony Blair and this Keir Starmer, the new guy in the UK, by the way. So I know you're in America, but you'll learn a lot from the old colony, what's going on there. All war hawks talking about conscripting the British Mail. So you're talking about a society that's actually been floating the balloon, the little thought balloon of full conscription. Why would you want to do that if you're not going to go into an escalate meltdown of mega distraction? Because nothing's more distracting from the chandelier stripping in the cathedral than a major war. People don't get to notice that thieves are actually taking anything last respites of value. I've driven through Zimbabwe on adventure bikes. I've seen those beautiful old farms now with goats on the porch and holes in the roof and everything of any possible value stripped out of them that were once beautiful areas. But this is a controlled demolition. And the people have already set the explosive devices. And those things are going to go off once everybody's out the cathedral, and some might go off with some people still in the cathedral. So this is going to get worse. That's not me being black-pilled and nihilistic. This has to be broken for the new to be put in. We're so invested in maintaining everything positive you do is actually holding up the economy. You go buy some milk, you do this, there's trade. Economies are actually quite difficult to break where there's been a system set up of value add all the time. But eventually, you cause so much damage fiscally that everything collapses. And we were talking before we started, and I was watching Lima and in Peru about the proliferation of fake notes. Eventually, they stop trying to bust these guys, and they create a loss of confidence even in cash, because in all the one thing about the dollar is by far more proliferated than any currency. I'm not going to tell you the Chinese yuan's going to replace it, because in Africa, it's dollar notes that float around. It's everything. But eventually, if you allow so much corruption to get in, that there's so many bent notes, there's so much badness, nobody knows what to trust, you cause the death of the system. And in that same way, we are witnessing that end of time. So unfortunately, it gets worse. It gets worse. This is why gold plays such a role. You get a clean X-rayed bar from a reputable buyer with a certificate, and you hold it in your own possession, and you actually are holding a balance sheet item that will transfer to the new system. We are absolutely ending the railway line, and we're jumping onto a monorail. Only it's not a nice monorail, it's a surveillance finance monorail. Everyone who steps in will have their face scanned, their eyeballs scanned. They'll know where you are, when you are. But you can still transfer. The game is to transfer your assets and not get destroyed in the explosion that's going to take down the old train. You need to get off that train with the bulk of your stuff that has long-term value. I'm not talking about stuff like conspicuous consumption items, things that retain long-term value, onto the monorail. That's the game we're playing. It's literally, you have to video game this. And that's how you also deal with game theory, and you manage it as a psyop. Because I'm not here to depress you, but there's forces that are working against you, actively against you. And it's not personal, and it's not individual. They might dislike me a bit more if they think I'm dangerous to their plan. But generally, the people watching this, it is just, we need you to be hollowed out. We need less of you around, and we need you to be hollowed out. And those that we allow to live will be essentially UBI serfs in a surveillance finance Bolshevik state. That is the tokenization game and the system. Your game is to resist this as much as possible so that you have a better quality of life that's non-reliant on a state that will have totalitarian control once all of that has been put into place.
Right.
And that's the game. And war is the final extraction of that flattening out of the Gini curve.
Yeah.
Because people who own the Lockheed Martin shares, the BAE, as I said, in 2014, and the master investor in London, UK, I was challenged on why I said, if you're British, buy BAE. also by Lockheed Martin. They're saying it's a terribly run company. I'm working it. I know all about it. I've got family there. It's a terribly, how can you be putting this forward? I said, I'm not putting specifically the quality of how efficient they are forward. I am saying they're going to be buried in a wall of hot money that is going to be borrowed into existence, because the final bastion of the stripping of the assets is in fact the war mechanism. And the military industrial complex, like banks, is part of the debt fiat system, is the intermediation. The military industrial complex is the banker enrichment tool. It is the billionaire class enrichment tool, and it is the impoverisher of the lower classes and the middle classes through inflation that it causes by the proliferation of debt and devaluation of the currency and the bodies. It's never the banker class that goes and fights the battles, etc., etc. So that is the final go-to card that is long-standing history, well before the pharmaceutical industrial complex. So that escalation is looking to be on, while Trump is being positioned previously, because you mentioned one of your questions right at the beginning was about Trump as a non-war candidate. Everybody thinks they're safe. I think it's quite feasible that they'll go for Iran. And they create some events. Israel is bombing the Houthis, southern Lebanon, all in the name of chasing the mysterious terrorist. And those terrorists will keep popping up everywhere as far as they care to bomb. And you've got Bibi Netanyahu, not his real name. Every single Israeli PM has been under a name change to sound like they're more Middle Eastern, to hide the fact that they are Khazar. So you're going to be looking at he's there now in America. Believe you me, that is setting up the next presidential relationship of what they're going to be doing and expecting to do in the Middle Eastern area. So like I said, you wouldn't expect gun controls to come in on Trump or biometric IDs. Nobody expected vaccines to come in that actually killed and damaged people to an immense degree under Trump either. It's what you don't expect that hurts you. It's the people close to you, or you think are close to you, that does you the damage, not a known enemy. And this is where people are going to get shocked on this. And that's why I say you got exactly the outcome the stage managers wanted out of that alleged shooting event.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say something, Francis. You made an excellent point when you said right now this transition, people need to focus on getting through it, taking any assets you have to where we're going and maintaining it throughout the process and the controlled demolition, while at the same time taking advantage and capitalizing on the opportunities that are going to come so that you do create wealth throughout this destruction. Because where there is massive crisis and destruction is an opportunity to create wealth. And people need to be able to see this from an unbiased perspective, because I believe when you do create wealth during this destruction, this is going to give you more choices in life.
100%.
You'll have more choices. Yes, that's how I see it, and it's extremely important. And what you said is also very important, that the weapons manufacturers, the defense contractors, they make a killing during this time, and
literally
it's in their best interests. And it's in their best interest to do that.
Well, that's how they consolidate wealth too and power. If I also may interject, two things. Robert Kiyosaki, first of all, said that capitalists need to go into hiding because the socialists are coming after you. That's something he said in one of his speeches. I caught it. It really resonated with me because that's exactly what we're experiencing here. So kind of like positioning yourself is so important as we transition into the new system. Hard assets, gold. I specifically love gold because it is tangible. You have control of it, and it's going to ride in an upwards trend as the dollar fails and continues to fail. Another thing also is I watched a very interesting video from 2001. And it turns out that they already have planned this out to invade Iran later on down the road. So I think that's what they're setting the stage for eventually, to go into war with Iran. And that's probably what's going to escalate to World War III to help us get through the transition as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Francis, I know you have your technical analysis and your charts you wanted to share with us. So I did want to shift the conversation a little bit into XRP and XLM. Are there any like new updates that you could share regarding their technical analysis and the technology behind them? Do you think these assets are going to play a key role in the new monetary system? I know we've spoken about this many times. It seems very clear that XRP is poised to be a crucial component of the new monetary framework, providing needed liquidity as the economy and banking system face the ongoing challenges. So what insights can you offer us as far as XRP and XLM?
I'm going to take you half a step back and finish on XRP.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why, because this has direct bearing on crypto. So we're done talking about the reset topics to a degree. They might show up again, I'm sure. But how do people build wealth? And I want to add value. And what I really liked about, I think it was Vondel, you said, is that there's huge opportunity in great collapse, providing you understand it's happening. This is not something you positivity your way out and keep going, no, there's a good outcome. No, there's a good outcome. Eventually you accept there's a bad outcome for most people coming. How do I get a good outcome for me and the people I care for and love so that I can be in a better position to give support to the people that matter to me? And that's what you have to do. You don't, there's a curse of positivity that everybody must positivity the way. No, it won't happen. We're going to win. Everyone's waking up. No, everything that they are planning is being very well executed. And most people are not exceptional individuals like yourselves, unfortunately. So the masses are in effect NPCs or half-truthers. So what you got to do is accept that fact. Don't reject it. And don't get overly psyoped or bummed out or whatever. And say, listen, me and a small number of people get this game fully to the full extent. How do we do it? So what am I showing you here? Because this has bearing on crypto, although I'm not starting in crypto. This is the US 10-year yield. So I'm going to be doing a Substack. I have a Substack under the Market Sniper name. I give thoughts out there, and you're getting an early look at what one of the charts that's going to be in here. What we've got here is the US 10-year yield minus the US 2-year yield, a monthly chart. And what many people have quietly forgotten is that we've been sitting in a twilight zone for quite some time. We are already for one of the longest in the modern era. And I treat, the 87 crash, it's kind of my lifestyle. That was my first investment experience, by the way. And I got properly rinsed in the August crash. I went into the army in August. By October, I'd lost about 40% of everything I had because I put it in the equivalent of the stock market at the time. This is where we are, and we have been in the largest inversion. The blue line is 0%. That is why I was mentioning the Yellen debt things, and we will have lost some people. They didn't get that. Don't worry. The more you hear about debt, keep listening. Slowly you pick bits up. I didn't understand debt markets. You're not encouraged to understand debt markets. We all understand share markets, Coke and Apple and all of this stuff, but you will in due course. So essentially, this is the largest inversion we have ever had, and it's always preceded a huge economic crisis. So the orange boxes are the inversions. That was the early 90s slump, 1991, 87 stock market, before the difference between the yield paid on the long-term debt was higher than the short-term debt. And when that goes negative, it means you're in a distressed economy. That means you're currently paying a higher yield on the shorter term debt than you are on the long-term debt. And generally, yield curves should go out. The longer I'm borrowing for, you should pay more because of the effect of inflation and compounding. You borrow for 30 years, you should actually pay more. If you're paying it back in 3 months, you should pay less. Inflation hasn't eroded that. You're paying the whole capital back. So what we've got, when you do this differential between the yields, this is quite a technical discussion, so I'll keep it short. What happens is this is a de-stress. That's your dot-com recession. That's your Asian crisis. This was subprime. Look at how we went negative. That means the debt curve is out of kilter. It's predicting a recession. It is 100% predictor of a major event, and the event follows. It's also a leading indicator. So after the orange square, you get the red square event, which is the collapse. You can see that 2009 is here. It started maybe in 2008, you can say, but you were getting warnings started in 5, 6, and going into 7, that the big event is coming. In the same way, post.com resume, it came in 99 before. You went into a recession 01, 02, 03. That did for Bush Sr. and saw Clinton coming. So all of these events are essentially very important. We've had the longest, which by scale is probably the height of the stress gets bigger. I would say the bigger the inversion, the bigger the crisis likely to follow. And we are now breaking back up, and the big event occurs on the reversion back to positive. That's why it's a leading indicator. So it's got a brilliant track record, and it tells you before that trouble is coming, and you're getting very close to it once you revert back positive. So what is actually happening is this is a major move upwards towards the 0% line. That is one leading indicator that I'll leave you back with. The other thing that's very interesting is the yen carry trade. Now, you probably don't know this, but many people, the institutions particularly, borrow in yen because of the low interest rate. And if you have a yield inversion that is reverting, and then you start to get quite a violent, this is weekly, it's a big time frame chart. Have a look at that in the daily. This is quite an unwind of the borrowed yens at low interest rates to speculate and buy debt instruments in America to earn yield, or buy MAGA stocks, or whatever the case may be. This is pointing to a dangerous unwind again on the yen carry trade, a cheap funding mechanism used by institutions. So you've got that as well. Then I did copper, which is kind of an industrial indicator. And let's just see if I can get this guy up for you. Here it is. So I've got the copper chart, but what I've done in this, I'll first just show you how the copper chart looks normally, because I've adjusted this copper chart. So we will go here, copper, HG, high-grade copper. And you might say, well, why are you showing me a commodity I have so little interest in? Because it's used in construction, infrastructure, building, everything. It's kind of like an oil as indicator in some ways. And it is in an utter collapse. I've done a couple of videos why silver has a partial industrial component and is underperforming gold during the period that copper is crashing really, really hard. You can see this has turned violently from about May. Now that's really interesting, because Q1 of this year was America, everything is awesome, we carry on. That's how the data was. And you had dollar strength. Q2 till the end of Q2, which is essentially June, not very long ago, we started to get, and we say this, the stats come in trends. Remember, they had the not recession because they said, no, there's too many people employed. You can't have a recession, even though we've had 2 negative quarters. It's not a recession if there's a red hot labor market. You remember all of this talk. So they denounced the original definition of a recession on the basis of red hot. Now, Powell is saying, well, the non-farm payrolls number has a tendency to overshoot and overstate. So hold on a minute. The fact that everybody's employed and doing really well and there's a great labor market, now you're saying the benchmark for that labor market is actually a bit of BS. So it's kind of, now we're seeing higher unemployment numbers, big undershoots on expectations of inflation. We're seeing real pain in the economy, and you've also getting copper that's turned in May. Now, why copper? I've already explained. You can see this is creeping up higher, but some of that is inflation. So what I've done is I've drawn a chart which actually reduces the inflation effect. So first I divided it by CPI, but the CPI number comes from the Bureau of Labor Stats, and they have a tendency to lie. And then I say I also want to deflate it by how much are people getting out of debt into gold, for example, on the basis of a financial collapse. We should actually have a chart that is receding, going down, because the economy is getting less efficient. Every bit of debt that gets borrowed gives less of a hit of a reaction. In fact, for every dollar you buy, you're getting well less than $1 in return. And so I divided copper by gold. So that's a deflator of your inflation risk covered in gold and your debt collapse. My debt collapse benchmarks and inflation benchmark is gold. That is the gold market. So when we divide copper by gold, we get this interesting thing. Here's when recessions occurred: 2001, 2003, post the dot-com boom. This is the general regression level. treat it as a regression level. That's the gradient that we're going down in. And that is pointing to reduced economic activity versus defense for debt collapse and inflation, which is the gold aspect to it. So copper is underperforming gold. Each time it turns down really brutally, this was a depression. Subprime was a depression. This was a huge pre-boom that led to a similarly proportionate collapse to the downside. The bigger the pump, the bigger the dump. It's quite simple, that. And I think people understand that natural geography. So you had an echo recession in 2011. Don't forget QE 1, 2, and 3 came and got you back above the red line here for a bit. Every time you've broken from above through the red dashed line, it's been a recession. You had an echo recession. It was a terrible period post. We couldn't get a bid. We couldn't get back up. Again, above the line trading down. That was the Shanghai Accord, 2016. That was China that did a subprime of its own after the rest of the West. So they created heat in the economy while we were collapsing in subprime. They were buying up all the copper. They were buying buildings. Everyone was talking about China taking over the world while we were in absolute dearth of depression. Repeat, lots of echo recessions. Like a big earthquake, you get some aftershocks. So it was a terrible period from 09 till 16, 17. It took ages to get back. Then we got reinflated back again. We got just above our red regression line. Then we had another major spill. This is copper divided by gold again. When copper starts dumping relative to gold, the defense against system, the insurance policy against collapse and inflation, you are seeing less industrial behavior, building buildings, improving highways, all of this kind of expenditure. So where are we now is the question. And we're in the statist everything bubble, and we got a back above. It took 7 trillion to citizens, and many people forget a 23 trillion with a T bailout of banks, not just American banks, but EU banks. Many people don't realize that CV19 actually was the largest bank bailout of them all. Huge loans were made to Credit Suisse, to Bank of America, to Merrill Lynch, 4.3 trillion here, 2.6 there, you name it. People don't realize that happened. They continued the banking system. They just never focused on it as a banking event. They sold you the medical event. They kept you focused on the medical. This is why look here, don't see what the other hand is doing. So what's actually happening? Long story short, we are in a copper dump phase, and it's now accelerating. So it's my assessment. Each time we broke below my red regression line approximately, and then started to sell off, you are in what will be known in retrospect as a recession. So this is another early indicator. So what does this mean for crypto and a lot of other things? We are already in some form of demand destroying event. You're going to get a name and a label for it. That's what I wanted everybody to hear and to understand in terms of what's going on right now. And let me just give you a chance to unpack that as well.
May I say one thing, Francis?
Sure.
So what you said, well, this is pretty interesting, and I want people to understand this, but when we see short-term interest rates much higher than long-term ones, this is one of the greatest indicators that economic tsunami is around the corner.
100%.
Just to summarize pretty much those charts you showed us in the beginning, is that we are about to experience a possible meltdown in the debt market. And that can eventually lead into more bank failures. And you see the narratives that are being perpetuated. U.S. regional bank failures are coming. And I think that's just going to make it harder for people to get loans and access to financial resources. So just a piece of advice for the listeners here is always to have some cash on hand. I understand cash is losing its purchasing power, but as more bank failures come and loans get harder to get out there, you want to have some cash. You want to have gold, some gold set aside. Just things like that, assets. That way you don't get kind of wiped out. Just like the rest of the middle class or whatever's left of it. As far as digital assets, I think still the XRP is a long-term game, and I put a tweet about this today. That's going to be the solution to a global liquidity crisis moving forward. So that's later on.
And after Francis shows his charts and makes some comments, we want to ask Francis about the CrowdStrike outage and what you saw if this was just a test run for something bigger that they're planning. We'll talk about that in a minute.
100%. So bringing it back to your audience that want to talk crypto, because I then took everybody on a long old journey away from the topic of interest. Everyone wants to understand crypto good. Do I buy? Do I sell? What's the answer? And all I'm trying to do is to give you potential bits of information of what's likely to happen around you during this time. I don't feel the run into the election is going to be a very good economic climate at all. I think it's going to be a decaying one. There could be pressure for the Democrats to get a bit of traction for a rate cut. They came into this year saying 7 rate cuts. We said never, it won't happen. Why? Because the debt markets, for a rate cut to occur, you need the debt markets to go up in value. This is what people don't realize. And they are creating ever more debt at an ever more parabolic level. Who's going to buy it? You currently have, and I covered that in a Substack article. Guys can go look at it, and I did it visually. I'll show only 5 seconds quickly, but it does help a lot of people understand these topics. Is that you've got, when debt rates go down, that means in actual fact the valuation of bonds are going up. It's like a seesaw. And at the moment, you've got China, who is in fact divesting from treasuries and is 100% not buying any new debt. It's going down. And as a result, just a quick share for that so that the guys can see that. You are getting a situation where there's no appetite for US debt at all. So let me do it like that. Sorry, now I've got what I wanted to show you here. Up, no more tunneling. So if the US Treasury, when the dollar was relatively strong, the thin guy is keeping his head above water, the fat guy is under the water, and that's the treasuries. Also, you have China, which we showed you in the Substack article, is a divester. This is from Tavi Costa, or in investments. It's a combination of loss of value and not buying any more and actually selling versus investing in gold. And then you have the fact that if the dollar's been kept relatively firm, because it's been winning against certainly the yen, everybody's winning against the yen. It's been a yen weakness trade. But if the debt markets are actually, the long-term debt markets have to lose. You've got to release, you've got 2 taps to release the pressure in this building geyser, this hot water tank that keeps getting filled more and more. And the pressure is going to blow because you're adding more and more debt into this. You've got 2 release valves. It's either the currency, which the Japanese chose. They're keeping their debt market valuation high by keeping their rates low. So the yen takes all the beating. They're letting pressure out the currency tap. Or you do what the Americans have done more. You allow the debt market to collapse. So the US 30-year Treasury's total return since 2020, it's fallen 45%. That's why the currencies relative to most other currencies, not all, not the peso, not the Swiss franc, not the peso over the last 3 years, not the Swiss franc over decades, or the Singapore dollar. But let's just ignore that point. Broadly, it's been relatively stronger than most. Your debt has lost 45%, your 30-year debt. Don't forget, that's some pension fund's asset. And if you have a managed asset somewhere, that means you might have some debt, government debt in your system. So that's an important understanding that I did just want to get across to everybody. So when it comes to crypto, we like Sol, and we are in Sol at the moment. However, what we're actually, by the way, I don't like it for what it stands for at all. I don't like much about what crypto stands for. But there is no doubt it's at the driving seat of tokenization, and it's going to go up in value. They have a plan for it. This is statism. So we've got a lot of technicals. We've put our community in it on the long side, and there's a lot of technicals to make the case for it against both Bitcoin. So it's going to outperform Bitcoin. Let's just get it up here, Sol USDT. And we also do see, because your question was around XRP when you spoke about crypto, we see in the long term that that's still going to come and happen. And again, it's a status game.